If you are an Indian fan, you may need a comforter ready before I start. India have played 8 test series in South Africa and they have lost 7. They have never won, and they will not win this one either, making it 0-9. They have won 4 tests, but it took them that many tours to register their first win. Their best result was a 1-all draw by MS Dhoni in 2010-11. India have been the number 1 side in the world, a major team for a long time, and has had plenty of stars on both sides of the ball. But when they go to South Africa, it all ends up with them shouting at the stumps and little else. So what is it that holds India back from winning in the Rainbow Nation? So if you need a VPN, go Nord. Use nordvpn.com/Kimber to get a huge discount off your Nord VPN plan plus 4 additional months for free. It's completely risk-free with Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. The link is in the show notes. Protect your computer like a cricketer protects its nether region with NordVPN today. The only way to tell this story properly is to go back in time. The first time these two teams played was an important series, as India were the first country to tour South Africa after the apartheid ban. And remember, originally, South Africa refused to play them because, they weren't. At Durban for Test 1, Kapil Dev, in the twilight of his career, was still the leader of the pack with 3 wickets. But India was struggling at 38 for 4 in the second innings, but a 100-run partnership for the 8th wicket meant that they recovered a little bit. Amre scored a terrific 100, and they ended up with a 23-run lead. But sadly, the 4th day was lost to rain, and so South Africa drew. Prabhakar and Srinath's opening burst in Johannesburg had South Africa at 26 for 4. It took a magnificent effort from Jonty Rhodes and Brian McMillan to guide South Africa back to a competitive first innings total of 292, with Prabhakar taking 4 for 90. Sachin Tendulkar then played a masterful knock of 111, but Kapil Dev second top scored with only 25. Sachin's innings had given India hope, but they were still 65 runs behind. Then Anil Kumble bowled 44 overs and gave away just 53 runs for his 6 wickets. South Africa were cruising at 108 for 1 with Andrew Hudson and David Richardson in the middle. And South Africa had been cruising until that point. But even with that spell, India had to score 303 runs on the 5th day. And they never even tried, just played it out for a draw. Alan Donald took 5 wickets on a batting surface in Burka after South Africa sent them in. None of the Indian batters bar Azharuddin crossed 25. They could only muster 212. Interestingly enough, India had 2 spinners in that game, with Venkatapati Raju as well as Anil Kumble. They both bowled marathon spells and took 3 wickets each and went at 1.5 runs and over. Unfortunately, South Africa managed to stonewall them with Hudson making a 182 ball 52, while Hansi Cronje made 100, which also took 8 hours. Again, South Africa had a lead, this time of 63 runs, and in response, India lost 6 for 31. But Kapil Dev did do his thing, and it was probably one of his most memorable hundreds ever. But South Africa only had to chase 155 runs, which they did with 7 minutes to spare. In the next test, South Africa scored 360 runs after batting for nearly 2 days to start the match in Cape Town. India batted even slower at 1.81 runs per over. Prabhakar and Mandrake added 85 runs in 58 overs. And Tendulkar picked up the pace for 73. They still ended up with only 276. Incredibly, from that moment onwards, the game actually got slower. South Africa made 130 for 6 in 97 overs. At one stage, they made 71 runs in 59 overs. Srinath bowled beautifully and Kumble went at less than a run per over. But this game was always going to end up in a draw. So rain stopped them in the first test, they never tried to chase in the second, and South Africa outplayed them after that. This series was quite brutal. It actually started pretty well when Venkatesh Prasad took a 5-for in Durban when India sent South Africa in. But Alan Donald followed up with another 5-for as the ball bounced and danced around laterally. South Africa set India 395 when Donald took Rathore and Ganguly in the first over. It was practically already gone. India only made it to 66 and Rahul Dravid played his best 27 not out ever. South Africa smashed India at Cape Town. Hundreds from Kirsten, McMillan and Klusner took them to a mammoth 529 for 7. And India were 58 for 5 and on the verge of another massive collapse. However, that is when Tendulkar and Azharuddin came together. They should really write a book about this. With a great counter-attacking partnership where they added 220 runs in just 40 overs. This meant that India avoided the follow-on as Tendulkar played one of his best knocks on South African soil. India reduced South Africa to 33 for 3 in the third innings, but they were so far behind it just didn't matter. And finally, it would take South Africa only 67 out of the 118 overs they left themselves to dismiss the Indian team. The series was already over and pretty embarrassing for India at this point. But this is the game that India should have won. Jarrod made 148 in the first innings and scored again in the second, meaning South Africa needed 356 to win, which looked pretty hard when they fell to 95 for 7 when Kallana and Klusener got together. Eventually, Big Lance was out, and with a little bit of rain and Alan Donald's help, Kallana got the draw. In fact, in that series, Donald took 20 wickets in 3 tests at an average of 16 and also saved the game with the bat. India were expected to do well in this series with the right blend of experience and youth in their seam attack. They also had 2 quality spinners and a top-notch batting lineup under the leadership of Sourav Ganguly, who took over the job because, well, this series was kind of haunted by the former captains and the match-fixing experience. South Africa won the toss at Bloemfontein and sent India in, and they were in a lot of trouble, but they ended up making 379 on a nice wicket for seamers. Sehwag's 105 was the big bang of his career, while Sachin brought up his 7,000th run. The total seemed fine until South Africa chased it up with 563 at nearly 4 runs and over. In response, India were 108 for 1, but unfortunately would be bowled out for 237 as Pollock took 6. South Africa chased 54 easily. India sent South Africa in at Burqa, but the home team did pretty well, almost entirely because Herschel Gibbs scored 196 out of 362. Unfortunately for India, only Laxman really batted well as Pollock had his way again. But India were already heaps behind. South Africa set 395 for the chase, and India batted for almost 100 overs to get the draw, never really trying to get the victory. So India could already not win this series, but a draw was possible. But this is where it got spicy. In fact, this might be almost the beginning of India taking over world cricket, because Mike Dinesh sanctioned Sehwag and Harbhajan for excessive appealing. He alleged that Tendulkar had ball tampered and also said that Ganguly had failed to control his players as captain. And while the ICC handed out suspensions, India just played those players in the next game. And so the ICC made it an unofficial match. Didn't really matter. India lost the game by an innings and 73 runs. This was a great series. And by that, I mean it involved an awful lot of Sreesanth and Andre Nell doing funny things. India started 2006 by batting first at Joburg, despite the fact that they won the toss and the conditions were in favour of the bowlers. This is not what they did in those earlier tours. They would end with 249, but it felt like a statement. And it was certainly a lot more fun when Sreesanth went crazy with the swinging ball and South Africa collapsed to 87. India scored 236 thanks to Laxman's 62 after coming in at 41. And with a 400-run lead, Sreesanth took early wickets and Zahir ran out de Villiers, and South Africa were never going to be able to chase this total. India won by 123 runs. Not only did they win a test, they won the first of a series. And Durban started really well for India when South Africa fell to 28 for 3. But unfortunately, they still scored 328 thanks to Ashwal Prince. In reply, Laxman made a 277-minute 50, but India coughed up a sizable lead. And despite Sreesanth taking early wickets again, the chase was 354 in 146 overs. Ntini took 5 wickets as no Indian crossed 50. It was a massive loss in the end. So this was the deciding test and India's biggest chance. Wasim Jaffer and Dinesh Karthik started strong and India made 411. At the very least, that should have been enough to force a draw, especially when India dismissed South Africa at the close of day 3 with a 41-run lead. The problem here was that South Africa had a new quick, Dale Steyn, and he took 4 wickets as India kind of spluttered after Pollock and Harris had slowed them down. At one stage, Dravid and Tendulkar scored only 24 runs in 15 overs, and India were dismissed for just 169 after being 90 for 2. South Africa had to chase 211, and they passed it 5 wickets down on the last day. But India really lost that series the day before. Morne Morkel was all over them in the first test of 10-11. It got worse when South Africa strolled to 620 for 4, giving them a 484-run lead at the midpoint. India did well to only lose that match by an innings and 23 runs. At Durban, India was sent in and made 205, and South Africa got to 67 for 2 when Kallis was run out, and then they collapsed. And I think I also need to mention the Sreesanth leg cutter to de Villiers. But India collapsed again. Only Laxman stood up, going after short balls and playing partnerships with Dhoni and Zahir. India made 228 again. South Africa needed 303. In the chase, Harbhajan and Sreesanth combined for wickets to never let South Africa feel all that comfortable, which is probably not the most famous thing that these two are known for together. Pujara finished the game off with another run out. So again, India came into the last match with a big chance of winning the series. But this time they sent South Africa in for Cape Town. Sreesanth took 5 wickets, but Kallis made 161 out of 362. But India would actually get a 2-run lead because of a brilliant Sachin Tendulkar 146. Unfortunately, then Kallis made another ton as Harbhajan took a 7-wicket haul. But South Africa also batted a lot of time, meaning India needed 340 in just under a day. India played for the draw, which is a very pragmatic MS Dhoni thing to do. These days, teams would go for the win. And even then, some would have. But Dhoni gave away a fairly slim chance at victory to make sure that he iced the draw. At least this was the first time they had not lost the series. It was a whole new world as India won the toss and opted to bat first at the Wanderers without their old batting legend. This was the new India. Kohli made 119, but India only got to 280. Zahir and Ishant took 4 wickets each, and so India had a small lead. Then Pujara made 150 and set a massive 458. After dismissing Kallis, India seemed to have a fair chance of winning, leaving South Africa 197 for 4. But the two friends, du Plessis and de Villiers, made huge hundreds to actually almost chase down this total in the end. And for the second match in a row, a team decided not to go for the win. In fact, you could argue that both teams kind of didn't in this point. South Africa shut up the shot with 16 runs needed from 19 balls because they had 3 wickets in hand. And India kind of allowed it to happen as well. This meant that India had to win the next and final test in Durban. They made 334, which seemed great, until South Africa made 500 thanks to Kallis' last test ton, which took him 400 minutes. They also put on 200 for the last 5 wickets as well. India were rolled easily in the third innings, allowing South Africa a 10-wicket chase. At Cape Town against an India team that seemed pretty well suited for 17-18, Bhuvi Kumar bowled a beautiful opening spell that reduced them to 12 for 3. Unfortunately, de Villiers and du Plessis teamed up again, and they ended up scoring 286. Then India fell to 92 for 7 before Hardik Pandya smashed the ball everywhere, meaning that India had a deficit but was certainly still in the game. Oh, and it is worth mentioning that this was Bumrah's test debut, and he turned up for the first innings and helped roll South Africa for 130, meaning the chase was 208. That seemed a long way off when Burnham Philander bowled like he was painting a sunset, and he took 6 for 42, including the incredible wicket of Virat Kohli, of which he spent about 4 overs setting him up for. India never got close. So India were in must-win territory again at Centurion, and South Africa were well on top until they collapsed. And Kohli started to make that look very silly, scoring 153 and just looking otherworldly. He gave India a 49-run lead. South Africa again toyed with a big score, but Bumrah broke through a couple of times and India had to chase 287. Sadly, Ngidi, who was also on debut, took 6 wickets and India only made 151. At this point, India could not win the series, but getting swept was ugly too. This test was one of those no one can make runs South African matches. India made 187 and South Africa stole a 7-run lead. India then managed almost 250 in the third innings, but without anyone making a 50, gritting it out. And Bumrah and Shami made sure that India did not go home empty-handed. And so this brings us to the last series, when we finally thought that India had their best chance of beating South Africa after beating Australia at home and pausing a series when they were up against England 2-1. And it started amazingly when KL Rahul made 100 in the first test at Centurion. There was still a collapse, but by that point, India had 327 runs. South Africa lost their top order, and Shami made sure that India had a 130-run lead. India stuttered by only making 174 in the third, but this was not a pitch to chase 305. Dean Elgar scored 77, but Bumrah and Shami took 3 wickets each, and India won easily as Quinton de Kock announced his retirement from the entire format. They had won the first test, and they had ended a wicketkeeper. That's a pretty good run. KL Rahul actually led the team at Wanderers after Virat Kohli's backspaz. He made 50, but the only other player who looked like making any runs was some slogging by R. Ashwin. That got them just over 200. And South Africa looked like getting a big lead until Lord Shakur took 22% of his career wickets in one innings. Or you could just call it a 7-for. So India only had a 27-run deficit. And they batted really well in the third innings and scored the highest total in the match, though perhaps this was a sign that the wicket was getting better for batting. They set South Africa 240, and Dean Elgar chased them largely with his outside edge, but it was also a very gritty knock against an attack who didn't have Siraj due to injury. Elgar was unbeaten in the 7-wicket win. So again, India found themselves in a must-win match at Cape Town. And Kohli was the 9th wicket to fall of that first innings. He made 79 and India only 223. But they had been 167 for 4. But they still ended up with a 13-run lead, meaning they had another chance going into the second half of a deciding game. This time, Rishabh Pant went nuts and scored 100. The problem was the rest of the 10 players combined did not make that many runs. So South Africa still had to chase 212, which would have been the second highest score in that match. And they chased it with ease, losing only 1 wicket on the final day. The only drama along the way was Dean Elgar's LBW, which of course brings us back to this. Virat Kohli and all of India screaming into the nothingness about why they keep losing to South Africa. And it's funny when you think about tests, because there has only been 22 when India have travelled to South Africa, and never more than 4 in a series. But it's also over 40 years. India have fared better than their Asian counterparts in South Africa. However, Sri Lanka have actually won a series there. Hello, Kusal Perera. India also relatively have the best suited top order for those conditions. I mean, Kohli, Tendulkar and Laxman have scored over 500 runs in South Africa with an average better than 40. But they've also usually lacked a long, deep batting lineup, which has made a lot of runs for them. They've always seemed to rely on a few players. And apart from their tours in 10-11 and 13-14, they never really put up big totals that challenged the South Africans. India's seam bowling in South Africa averages 32. Again, better than other Asian teams, but not particularly good when you consider that South African seamers averaged 23 in those matches. India have usually lacked a bowling attack with consistent wicket-taking ability. And when they weren't bad with the ball in the last couple of tours, their batting didn't match it anyway. Looking at spin, India has underperformed compared to Sri Lanka, hi Murali, and Pakistan. Jadeja, Harbhajan and Kumble have all had moments. Ashwin probably not as much, but their spinners just haven't been the same kind of consistent threat that Pakistan and Sri Lanka have managed. And how important is winning the toss? Well, 3 of India's 4 wins have come after that. The only exception is the Durban Test in 2010. It's also important to note what India usually preferred to do after winning the toss. They've batted first on 9 occasions and sent South Africa in 4 times. And at first they probably bowled from a position of weakness. And now they are strong enough to bat first, which I suppose is progress. And there's no doubt after that first win in 06 that they really changed the way they looked at things. But you look at these numbers and it's quite clear that winning toss makes a huge difference for India in South Africa. Oh, and I covered all the series and I forgot one, the current one, which they also now cannot win. So what does stop them? Well, it's obviously a lot of things. Clearly the pitches, which have a lot more lateral movement than in Australia. So it's a combination of like Australia and England. The tossers certainly got in their head for a long time. When they go to South Africa, they just don't make enough runs. And while their seamers have been good, the South African seamers are just better. And the Indian spinners never stepped up consistently enough. But ultimately, when you look through their history, they have had plenty of chances to win defining moments. They just haven't managed to get over the line in any of them. Sometimes they have fallen apart, and other times they've chosen not to go for it. And it's going to be another few years before India gets a chance to come back to their final frontier. And in the words of Iron Maiden, there's nothing but wait till my time comes. The final frontier, the final frontier, the final frontier, the final frontier, the final frontier. Sometimes you just need to take the slips out and bowl defensively. And you need to be just as careful with your computer's defenses. If you need a VPN, Nord. NordVPN.com/Kimber will get you a big discount and 4 additional months for free with your NordVPN plan. They also have a 30-day money-back guarantee if you don't like it. You can find the link in the show notes. So start with some dot balls and turn them into maidens with NordVPN/Kimber. The final frontier. The final frontier. The final frontier. Wise words indeed.